Lexington, North Carolina, 1987. 29-year-old mother of two Mary Davis goes for lunch with her boyfriend and is never seen again.
They actually got together and then went to the pit stop and got some pizza, went back to the park and ate it, talked for a while, and then she left to come back to work.
After having lunch with Rodney Lee Michael, Mary was never seen alive again.
A large-scale search begins, and Mary's brutalized body is found the next day.
Her body was covered heavily by leaves and branches. She had visible marks around her neck, and she also had gunshot wounds to her extremities.
We heard Lisa start screaming, "She's dead, she's dead, Mary's dead." But my grandma hit the floor and she just started rolling and she was like, my baby, Mary can't be dead."
Lexington Police Department turns over every lead, but the case goes cold. Decades later, can the advent of a groundbreaking new tool, forensic investigative genetic genealogy, reveal the true identity of Mary's killer?
I think forensic genetic genealogy is going to lead to a world where criminals are caught the first time they commit a crime, and there are no more unidentified victims.
Criminals who have hidden in the shadows for years find there's no escaping science and their own family DNA. Welcome to Bloodline Detectives. Lexington, North Carolina, a small town 1 hour north of Charlotte.
I would describe Lexington as a small town type feel. You walk through downtown and you can still see the mom and pop shops. Everyone's very friendly. It's just your quintessential southern town.
It has good roots, good history. The city has done a great job of maintaining its identity. You know, our uptown Lexington is a gem. Right now, we're maintaining that small town feel, but it's booming around here. Industries are coming, people are building houses. It's really exciting to have seen it, transition over the years.
Whenever you hear Lexington, you do not think of major violent crimes.
One of Lexington's natives is 29-year-old mother of two Mary Davis.
She had 2 children. She was married. She was one of 10 children. Very tight-knit family, all lived in this general area in Lexington.
Mary was a beautiful person. She was beautiful inside and out. She loved her family. She loved her children. She loved people. Mary was just loving and caring. She had a magnetic personality. People were drawn to Mary because she was just very friendly. She was a lot of fun. She was just always bubbly.
Mary and her husband Richard are having marital problems. Around this time, she meets a man at work named Rodney Lee.
She just told me that she had met a guy at CPM where she worked at and that she really wanted to be with him, but Mary was a pleaser and my grandmother didn't believe in divorce. And she didn't want him to go through that. She didn't want the kids to go through that.
My understanding in reading reports and talking to people, they had kind of what many would call an open relationship.
On May the 30th, 1987, it's just another day for Mary Davis as she makes her way to her job as a clerk at the local hardware store.
So her husband reported that he had spoke to her that morning around 8:45 or so as she was going to go to work.
First thing that morning is she met with her boyfriend. She met him and then they agreed to meet for lunch at the park. At lunchtime, she punched out. She went to the park. They actually got together and then went to the pit stop and got some pizza. Went back to the park and ate it, talked for a while, and then she left to come back to work, and he went home.
Later that day, Mary's husband Richard grows concerned when she does not return to the family home.
Mary Mathis Davis's husband came back from his sister's house. He had gone swimming, fell asleep, woke up, and his wife had not returned home yet. So he became concerned, drove down to the hardware store where she worked for the last couple weeks.
He went by Lanier Hardware where she worked, had been working there for a few weeks, and they had said that she had never returned from lunch, and they found the car there.
He saw her car there. He became increasingly concerned, reported her missing, contacted her brother, and continued to look for her.
The investigators, when they arrived on the scene, they secured the vehicle. They were able to raise the windows, lock the doors to secure it in that fashion.
After looking all night, Mary was nowhere to be found. The next day, her brother and sister continue their relentless search.
They were just looking in different places to maybe see if anybody had seen Mary, going to places where they knew that she may visit. And they ended up near her house and turned around there in the church parking lot, across the road from where they were living. And they noticed a kind of an old roadbed that went down through the woods. And they said it looked like there was some tire tracks, or, like the weeds had been knocked down. So they decided to just get out and walk down through there, and look. And while they were walking, he walked up on a body, and, he said he pretty much knew, in his heart that was probably his sister. So they backed out and called the police.
The way in which Mary's body was concealed shows the lengths her killer went to try and hide their heinous crime.
The detectives at the time had to have the assistance to find her, since she was kind of hidden in some growth.
Her body was covered heavily by leaves and branches. Her body was only partially clothed at that point, and she had visible injuries.
The injuries that were reported by the officers there at the scene were what they initially thought was maybe like cigarette burns or something on the skin, and some possible bullet holes in the body itself.
She had visible marks around her neck, and she also had gunshot wounds to her extremities.
Police now have the difficult task of informing the rest of Mary's large family that she has been found.
I was due the day that she was found with my daughter. So when we got there, they told us all to go in the house, and they wanted to talk to Mary Mathis's dad, Bert Mathis. And he went on the front porch. Lisa snuck out the side door, because that's just Lisa. He was out there talking to them. Me and my grandma was in the house, and my cousin Kitty. And about that time, we heard Lisa start screaming, "She's dead, she's dead, Mary's dead."
I went into shock. I was in the middle of the road screaming, crying. I fell to my knees and in a fetal position, just screaming and crying. And my mom heard me screaming and crying.
My grandma hit the floor, and she just started rolling, and she was like, my baby, not my baby. No, Mary can't be dead." And I was on the floor holding my grandma, just so she wouldn't hurt herself, because she didn't know what she was doing. She was just in a shock, and she just kept rolling back and forth. And they were worried about me, because here I am with a big old belly, ready to go at any time.
She was starting to have some breathing problems. So my niece, Renee, had called the ambulance to pick my mom up.
The impact of this horrific crime is felt by the community as soon as the news breaks of Mary's murder.
You have a missing female who has been found the next day, killed in what's obviously was a violent manner, and left in the woods behind a business. I can tell you, knowing this community over the years and knowing it now, that would definitely cause some concern in the community, without question.
Nothing like this ever happened in Lexington. I mean, I remember us walking behind Coble Dairy up to Belk's, which is on Main Street, me and Lisa, and we were 10, 11 years old. We'd walk to Belk's. I mean, we never thought anything happened. We constantly played around the block. We had a 3-wheeler bicycle. We rode it everywhere. I mean, we were everywhere. We weren't scared. We were a big family. I mean, we never feared anything.
A family in distress and a community wrapped in fear. Police need to act fast before this killer can strike again. Lexington, North Carolina, May the 31st, 1987. The body of 29-year-old mother of two Mary Davis is discovered by her family the day after she disappeared. Police arrive on the scene and immediately start their investigation.
Patrol definitely would have been first to arrive on the scene because they would have been working, shift work that day. And then once they located that, they would have called their supervisor, who in turn would have called probably the on-call detective. That specific spot where her body was located was kind of a noted place where if you lived in that area, you knew you could pull back there and be out of sight, out of mind. And people would dump things. You might find some old tires that somebody was wanting to get rid of, or some construction debris. So from time to time, people would just drive back there and throw things out of the back of the truck and then drive off. There was multiple tire prints. Most crime scenes, you're going to start larger. They would have basically just roped that area off and positioned officers kind of there at Revco and maybe up at the church to try to keep anybody else from coming in so that they could start looking for any evidence.
A wide array of things were collected. Best practice is to kind of fan out and gather anything that might deem pertinent to the crime scene. Clothing, things that were close to the crime scene, such as shoes, any kind of things that seemed like they may have fallen off somebody or seemed unnatural in the environment. Mary had on the same thing Richard, her husband, described her as leaving for work the previous day on, which was a jean overall, a white t-shirt, and some white shoes.
Well, of course, the body would be protected as much as possible. They're going to look for anything that they visibly see, mark it, photograph it, measure it out for sketches before it's, meticulously collected and bagged properly. And then the body would have been placed onto a white sheet and covered up so that if any evidence is on the body falls away from the body, they still have it there intact. Once the body's removed, they would go back through that crime scene again, using metal detectors to see if they find any shell casings or somebody would have dropped anything, just doing a foot grid search and a neighborhood canvas of any residences, just knocking on doors to see if anybody's seen or heard anything.
Her shirt was there, her bra, her bib overalls, her shoes, and also her personal effects, as far as her pocketbook was also located. They did an incredible job in 1987 to preserve and collect everything that they located there, all the way down to the tree branches were collected.
An extremely thorough crime scene investigation is underway, but one piece of crucial evidence seems nowhere to be found.
There was no shell casings found. There was no gun ever found either.
There was a gun that we had seized at one point, but no, there was never any determination that that was the gun.
With no gun discovered at the crime scene, police rest their hopes on Mary's autopsy for an all-important lead.
They have the training and the skills to see things that we're not going to be able to see with the naked eye. For instance, what the officers thought were cigarette burns ended up being bites from like bugs, where her body had laid there overnight.
She had signs of strangulation around her neck, and then she had gunshot wounds to her legs and arms.
They had the training to be able to go in and determine cause of death. We may think, okay, someone is shot, so they were killed by being shot. And she had been shot, but that's not what took her life.
The autopsy revealed that that was a post-mortem wound. She ended up dying of asphyxiation. She choked.
You could tell there was some kind of struggle just based on how her body was positioned and the markings she would have on her arms.
Why, after she is deceased, would someone shoot her 4 times in non-fatal areas? It didn't make any sense. If you wanted to make it look like she was shot and killed, then you would shoot her somewhere in the torso or in the head area, not in the arms and legs. that's not going to do anything, especially with a small caliber handgun. The wounds also appeared to be basically contact wounds. The gun was strategically placed before the trigger was pulled, almost as to minimize the amount of damage.
The only thing that would point to post-mortem wounds would be a very personal vendetta or somewhat a crime of passion, which kind of speaks to no intent.
As well as an autopsy, a sexual assault kit procedure is done on Mary's body.
Her body would have been transported to the hospital, and then they would do a sexual assault kit, which is standard procedure for us on a case like this. And then it's properly packaged and put in evidence.
While at the hospital, police take this opportunity to have Mary's identity to be fully confirmed by her mother.
When my mother left the house, the ambulance took her to the hospital. When she arrived, they had Mary in a body bag. And my mom saw that, and, she was just really upset. And so she went into the emergency room, they checked her out, and then they asked her if she would identify the body of her daughter. And so my mother and my cousin was the ones that identified her.
Once the post-mortem examinations are done, Mary's family have a closed casket funeral for her, something some members find difficult.
And I wanted to see her. I wanted to know that that was my Aunt Mary, because I didn't believe them. I was just like, how do you know? Who's seen her? I want to see her. They just kept saying, well, they had, her ID was there, they knew it was her, Grandma had, but I didn't see her. And they said, well, we're not opening the casket. And I was like, why are they having a closed casket? It just seems funny to me. To me, it just didn't make any sense. And they finally said, well, she was so deteriorated out in the sun that day that there was no way they could do anything to make her look presentable. And that's why they left her in the body bag and the casket was closed.
The funeral was very hard. I think I was still in shock. There was a lot of officers there undercover. There was family, there was friends.
A lot of times you go there to support a family. In a community like this, we go sometimes to support the family, but there is other things there. We want to see who's there, see the lay of the land, who shows up. Is there anybody that looks suspicious? Is there anybody that the family observes and be like, that seems odd where they're here? You just don't know, but you got to be there and be observant just in case.
As soon as the funeral is over, police are right back to their investigation work.
There was a couple different individuals that was of interest. Obviously, knowing that there was a boyfriend at the time and a husband at the time, that gives you a few things to look at. We started getting information, tips and things that the husband was involved, boyfriend was involved, perhaps even a brother was involved. The boyfriend was interviewed.
Ronnie Lee Michael was very, very emotional during the interview. He explained his day as meeting up with Mary for lunch.
He said, that they had been talking for a while. They had worked together, I think, previously at another place where they met. He says that he came to Lanier's that morning and spoke with her before she went to work. They agreed to meet at lunch. They met at lunch. They went and got something to eat, went back to the park, spent a little bit more time there, eating, talking.
He described the last time he saw Mary around 1:30.
Police then speak with Mary's husband.
So Richard came into for an interview here at the Lexington Police Department. He was forthcoming with his DNA, which was something that definitely needed to be collected from him, given a sexual assault kit had been done.
He gave them a statement about what happened that day. And I'm sure at some point later on, they probably pressured him more to see if he was still telling the same story, asking him if he had any involvement in her death, what exactly was going on. And then at some point during their speaking with him, he got upset.
Richard realized that he was a suspect early on, I believe, and requested a lawyer.
They did offer him a polygraph test. He took it and he did not pass.
The family shifted their main focus on the husband, Richard Davis. for the old saying that if someone passes away, the husband did it. But I know that Mary and Richard did have a rocky relationship, and so a lot of the focus was on Richard.
Mary's family remains suspicious towards her husband Richard, but police have no evidence against him. Then Mary's boyfriend Rodney Lee offers investigators a potential lead.
Mary's boyfriend stated that he noticed Russell Wood's truck near the parking deck entrance as he picked Mary up for lunch.
Mr. Michaels knew Russell from school and from around town. And when he came to see Mary that morning to discuss meeting at lunch, he observed Russell's father's truck. It was a distinctive vehicle, an older blue truck, and he noticed Russell was driving it. So he just made a mental note of it. He remembered it. He then told law enforcement later during an interview that while he was there, he did see Russell. So of course, anybody that we could identify of having been at Lanier's or around Lanier's and we had a name, then it was somebody we needed to absolutely talk to see what they had seen. He was interviewed, I think, by a couple of detectives. He said he had some knowledge of Mary, but really didn't know her personally, knew the family. He had grown up, a few blocks away from them on another street. So he knew of her, but he stated he didn't really have a personal relationship with her, didn't know her personally.
Russell Wood had mentioned that he had been at Lanier Hardware, but he was only there for 5 or 6 minutes. So that did put him there. There was no other evidence at the time.
It looks like another dead end for the police, so they now consider all other avenues of the investigation.
They luminoled Mary's vehicle, and there was blood found on the rear of the vehicle. At that time, they did not have access to the DNA technology that we do now. They did some very critical interviews, including witnesses at her workplace.
Near Lanier's, near the parking deck, there was a tip that a woman caller saying that she did hear some screaming coming from the top of the parking deck.
The police responded. There was nothing to be found at the time that could be followed up on. This was a time where you didn't have cameras on every corner. You didn't have all kinds of stuff around, so there was nothing to go on.
We got a lot of tips, and a lot of them were dead ends, or what we call a dead end, but we were very appreciative of anything that was given. After you work a case for so long, you just kind of run out of fresh ideas. It's monotonous. You're going over and over and over. You go back and interview the same person for the second time, third time, fourth time, and I'm sure they may get tired of it. You have to keep it fresh in the minds of the public, hoping that you finally get that piece of information that you need.
After a few years, and everything was being pointed to the husband, there was no tangible evidence, really. You could say it went cold in the sense that there wasn't a lot of new leads coming in, but that doesn't mean that we shelved it. We'd never close our cases, particularly unsolved homicides. We do not close unsolved homicides.
The years pass by, but the Lexington Police Department never give up hope her killer can be found. It's not until the utilization of a groundbreaking new technology that might finally give Mary's family answers. Lexington, North Carolina, 1987. 29-year-old Mary Davis is murdered in cold blood and left hidden in a small forested area on the edge of town. Police opened every aspect of the investigation, but the case goes cold. Her family never gave up hope that they would one day have answers.
My mother mourned for so many years. She would always tell me, Lisa, whatever you do, don't ever give up. Don't ever give up trying to find out who did this to our Mary. And I promised her I would never, ever give up.
She was kind of the driving force behind not letting the case get cold. I think that Lisa was so interested in the case, and the old saying, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, she was not going to let this case go, and she didn't. And of course, I was happy that she didn't. She was constantly contacting law enforcement. Some people might want to say she's pestering you, she's bugging you. I never looked at it like that because I would think I would be doing the same thing if this was my sister.
Lisa's persistence starts to pay off as police take a DNA sample they found and enter it into the criminal database CODIS.
CODIS is a national database where offenders' their DNA is collected and then placed into the CODIS database so that whenever we do have a crime where DNA is located, they can run it, as long as it's CODIS eligible, they can run it against CODIS and see if there's a hit.
Because Mary's murderer has never been arrested before, their DNA isn't in the database. Police seemingly hit another dead end, until Detective Effinger gets involved in the case.
I was assigned the case in 2020, making headway on it in 2021.
First contacted about this case as I was coming on to the cold case unit, and I was told to meet with Lexington Police Department specifically about the Mary Davis case, about some DNA evidence that they had found. Detective Effinger with the Lexington Police Department did an amazing job with finding this evidence that had never been tested. He advised that it was from a sexual assault kit. It was going to be a sperm sample. And at that point, we contacted the lab to find out the quality of the DNA.
Special Agent Denny with the North Carolina SBI, Special Bureau of Investigations, had a connection with Othram Labs in Texas, who specialize in DNA and forensic genealogy. And that is how the connection took place between the Lexington Police Department and Othram Labs.
Othram is the first lab in the world that's purpose-built to identify victims and perpetrators from crime scenes. Prior to Othram, people were using medical testing and consumer testing, genomic testing, to try to build profiles that were more comprehensive than the traditional forensic testing profiles that you have. But unfortunately, when you use medical testing or consumer testing, that's built for fresh DNA, single source DNA, DNA that is stored in pristine condition in the right temperature, taken from lab to lab and then tested. That's very different from the type of evidence that you see when you go to a crime scene. You almost always have mixtures of perpetrator and victim. You almost always have contamination. So what we did is we built a lab that created forensic grade genome sequencing in order to be able to get the most information from the perpetrator or victim profile left at a crime scene so that you can truly ascertain their identity. Even if the matches in the database were very few, very remote, you'd still be able to see those relationships and be able to build back and infer their identity.
We ask that any prior lab reports be provided. Specifically, we're looking to understand what evidence is available, what evidence has been tested. Of that evidence that has been tested, are there multiple contributors associated with that evidence item? And then ultimately, we want to know, once we have the evidence in-house, if we feel reasonably confident we can build a DNA profile that will help to resolve the case. In the case of Mary Mathis Davis, Othram received a DNA extract. That DNA extract was from a sex assault kit. We developed a DNA profile from that DNA extract for a male individual.
Once a DNA sample is developed, Othram then begin the revolutionary process of forensic genetic genealogy.
In forensic genetic genealogy, after a DNA profile is built and it's been developed in the laboratory, that profile is uploaded into databases. These are genealogical databases where people have consented for law enforcement to use their information to help solve cases like the case of Mary Mathis Davis. And in this particular case, the DNA profile was uploaded into the database, and Othram's forensic genetic genealogy team went to work to build a family tree for this individual. And so what we're looking for is relatives, genetic relatives. These aren't necessarily people that you know or people that you would associate with, but these are people that in some way you're related, maybe a fifth cousin, a fourth cousin, a great-great-great-grandparent, something like that. And so in this particular case, we worked to provide new leads to investigators that helped to point them in a direction so that they could talk to potential relatives of the person responsible for the murder and rape of Mary Mathis Davis.
What they did was they provided lists of targets that they wanted for us to collect DNA. So it started out as a list of first cousins, half cousins, and what we would do is try to speak to somebody on this list and have them consent to give their DNA.
The first list of people would have been further out matches. At that point, we located one of them who previously was a police officer at the Lexington Police Department. That would have been who we initially tested on the list. So at that point, we collected his DNA and we sent that to Othram.
As the Bloodline Detectives team work through the perpetrator's family tree, incredibly, they get to the point where they recognize a name.
After we submitted his DNA, they returned back with another batch of people, and those would have been potential cousins as well. At that point, I began building those family trees. Whenever I started building their family trees, each one, I located the name Russell Grant Wood.
Once she saw it on the list that Othram had provided, she contacted me right away, and we began to look back through the case file, look back through the supplements, and it all started to kind of fall together at that point.
So he began looking at his case file, I began looking at mine, and he was all over the case file. They had initially spoken to him, and he was always one of the suspects in the case.
Russell Wood was interviewed shortly after Mary's murder, as Mary's boyfriend witnessed him in a unique truck in the parking lot the day she was killed, but police found no evidence against him.
In his police interview, he did say that he was at Mary Davis's work that morning, which would have been Lanier's Hardware. He said he was only there for a couple minutes, though. He said that he knew Mary Davis's father, but did not know Mary.
I think that would ultimately be what did it for me and Special Agent Denny, is when he denied knowing her at all.
Police dive deeper into who exactly is Russell Wood.
Russell grew up here in Lexington, went to high school here, and he actually worked for the city of Lexington here. I guess until he retired. He worked a long time, I guess over 20-some years. I knew Russell, not real well, but in attending certain city functions, was around him, had spoken with him in the past. To me, he was kind of an introvert type of a person, quiet. He always seemed a little uneasy around me.
Very unassuming fellow that had no criminal history. He worked for the city of Lexington during the time he delivered beer, and he worked at a nightclub. Never had any children, never got married.
Russell Woods had a girlfriend at the time. Whenever he was spoken to by police, he did talk about falling off of a pallet at work, and he had sustained some injuries and broken his glasses at the time. And he also drove a truck that was suspected to be in the area, which would have been his father's truck. So we found evidence that would lead us to believe that he was definitely in the area.
Everything that previously seemed a mystery kind of fell into place, where there would be mention of a blue pickup truck, where there would be mention of white male with a beard and glasses. Everything about the beer route that he took, it all fell into place.
After 35 years, police finally have a break in this case. However, to ultimately prove that Russell Wood was in fact Mary's killer, police will need a direct sample from him to finally get justice once and for all. Lexington, North Carolina, 1987. 29-year-old Mary Davis is murdered in cold blood and left hidden in a small forested area on the edge of town. Police open every aspect of the investigation, but the case goes cold. Over 30 years later, thanks to the utilization of a groundbreaking new technology, forensic genetic genealogy, police have evidence pointing towards one man, Russell Wood.
We purposely waited to notify family just because nobody wants to get their hopes up.
Police caution proves to be wise, as they're dealt a hard blow in this investigation.
We were not able to interview Russell Woods because he died in 2013. It is always hard when you find out that the perpetrator of a crime like this will never be brought to justice because they're deceased.
He died of pancreatic cancer in 2013. His family had said it was pretty painful and difficult death. He was someone that was a person of interest to law enforcement because he was noted at the crime scene. He had driven his father's truck there. He was questioned about why he was there. During his questioning, he said he was only there for a few minutes and he had left, but he was definitely someone that law enforcement had looked into during this investigation.
As Russell Wood is now dead, police need another plan of attack to get their final DNA sample to prove that he was in fact Mary's killer.
He had been cremated. He had no biological children.
Cremation leads to most DNA being destroyed, but sometimes there's bone fragments left. From those, we're sometimes able to get DNA. There wasn't a need to get DNA from his ashes because you could confirm his identity by testing close relatives and using KinSNP, and that's exactly what we did.
So we were told to obtain a sample from his nephew.
The nephew was very open with us. We explained in detail somewhat the investigation and just that we were curious and that this could either rule the suspect out if he wanted to consent to provide his DNA. The nephew was very open and said that he would be shocked if it was his uncle.
He saw the opportunity to help solve a crime and was probably curious about whether someone in his family was maybe involved or not involved. So he willingly done that.
Once we obtained the sample from the nephew, we then had to go obtain a sample from a cousin on the other side of the family to confirm that it was Russell Woods as the perpetrator.
After 35 years of uncertainty, confusion, and countless hours of determined police work, they finally have answers.
We were absolutely elated because they said that the probability was 95% that Russell Woods was our guy. It was a moment that you'll never forget. Whenever I looked at Mary in the case file as a young mother myself, you connect with her on a different level, and you cannot imagine what she went through in her final moments on Earth.
Our investigators, it came to me and says, "We know who killed her." I'm like, okay. And they started telling me, I'm like, I know that name. I know that name. And so they started explaining more to me.
So once I notified the chief of police, we came up with when and where we would notify the family. We drove personally out to the home of Lisa Yates and spoke to her personally in her living room about it.
I heard a knock at my door, and it's Sergeant Evanger and Rummage. They told me that they were closing Mary's case. And I get really defensive with them because I was like, why? Why are you closing her case? And they said that they had solved it. I was like in shock. They were going through everything from step to step on what had happened and what procedure and everything that they took. And they said that Mary had been raped, and I just broke down and started crying because I never knew she had been raped. By looking at the autopsies and stuff like that, I never knew. I was so emotional, and I was just asking all these questions about where did this guy live? Who is this guy? Did they have any information about that? And then I started thinking about my family.
It was a somber moment. You're very excited to bring closure to the family, but you're very aware of the weight of that on the family. They're going to relive everything that they've went through since 1987. And then Russell Wood's family is also going to grieve the fact that their family member committed such a heinous crime.
I was very happy for the family. I was proud of our folks throughout the years to stay with it. To see the level of excitement on our staff here, the excitement they had that, you know what, they all pulled together and worked together they're gonna get this solved.
After meeting with Mary's family, investigators want to tell every single police officer that worked on this case, including the original team back in 1987.
We notified the previous investigators and people that were actually close to the case, even patrol, and it was all a big light bulb moment. A lot of people would have never thought Russell Wood was the suspect, so it was a lot of shock and awe that day.
He always seemed a little uneasy around me. Maybe it explains it. It makes sense now. It didn't make sense then. I just thought that's the type of person he was. He was, kind of a big burly guy, just kind of quiet and unassuming. Now I think some of the uneasiness, to me, it starts to make sense of why he was acting like that.
I was thinking the investigators, they were on to something. They interviewed him. They were on to something. It's not that they messed up. You talking about the suspect. Very kind of unassuming guy, had multiple jobs, no criminal history. And I'm like, wow, it all makes sense. And, you look, all right, the truck was there. He delivers stuff there at the Winn-Dixie. That was my first thought. They were on to something.
To finalize the case, police meet with the district attorney's office to show them their evidence.
So the DA, Gary Frank, sat down with us as I presented the case as a whole in presentation and laid out elements of crime to see what fit.
Our staff put together a very good presentation and said, look, we have all this information. Here's the evidence we got. And in meeting with the district attorney, Gary Frank, he acknowledged, even, putting in documented in writing, that should Russell Wood be alive at that time, he would have been charged him and indicted him for murder, which allowed us to publicly state who it was.
The DA made sure that he made it public that if Russell Grant Wood was alive, that he would be prosecuted for first-degree murder.
We needed that to be able to publicly say that this has in fact been solved, but nobody's going to be charged. The case was solved. It's not about closing the case, it's about solving the case.
Without the incredible preservation of evidence by police back in 1987, none of this would have been possible.
I actually was surprised that they took the time to do what they did in 1987 because DNA was not prevalent then. It really showed their forward thinking of this may be important in the future.
My father-in-law likes to say, once it's gone, it's gone. That's a true statement. Evidence can be contaminated if it's not handled properly, but they handled it properly with the technology that they had back then. They preserved it, and it ended up solving the case.
And I was really impressed with Detective Effinger looking back on this case and making such an old case a priority and finding that evidence.
Now Mary's family can start to move on and focus on celebrating her memory.
She was a social butterfly. She was charming. She never met a stranger. She was always kind to people. She would always want to be there for people. I mean, she would give you the shirt off her back if she had to.
She has watched over me since the day she passed. Sweetest, kindest, selfless person you could ever meet, and beautiful.
I think Mary has always watched over the family as well as her children and now her grandchildren.
A heartbreaking end to a complex and painstaking search for a barbaric killer. It's a case that in all likelihood would never have been solved without the tenacity and pioneering work of forensic investigative genetic genealogists, scientists who believe that there is no hiding place from your own family's DNA.
It's amazing. We would have never figured this out. I wish that every baby that was born, they'd swab that mouth first thing. I mean, I do, just for any future reference. I mean, we'd have never knew. I mean, we were always told she wasn't raped. So whenever they was like the DNA, and we was like, what do you mean the swab DNA? We had no idea. We were just told that she'd been pretty much tortured.
I do not believe this case would have ever been solved without forensic investigative genetic genealogy because There is no hope for a CODIS profile hit if the offender is no longer alive and continuing to commit crime. So there is no way to identify them through CODIS unless you have their DNA.
He left something there and he got caught, and we know now. And I hope that it teaches even criminals that the people that do stuff bad like this, you're going to get busted one way or the other. You're not going to get by with it. I mean, God's going to take care of it one way or the other.
I'm hopeful in the future that more cases like Mary Davis will also get closure because of the impact that forensic investigative genetic genealogy is going to have on our career.
Forensic genetic genealogy is going to lead to a world where criminals are caught the first time they commit a crime, and there are no more unidentified victims. And to me, this is the biggest revolution in crime fighting that there has been in decades and ever in our lifetime.